Hi there. This is the second video in my series following set reports we're getting on the filming of the first prequel pilot to Game of Thrones, which is about the Long Night 8,000 years ago and the first rise of the White Walkers, and apparently called Blood Moon, based on their internal memos and logos we've seen on paperwork. Now, this was part of the first video, but I split it off because I hit a big chapter break that made sense. That the first video was talking about all the original filming reports we were getting coming out of locations in Northern Ireland, which is their base of operations, but which now seems to have wrapped up by mid-July. And in the second one here, I wanted to talk about the new location filming taking place in Italy, where they never filmed before, in coastal cliff locations that many suspected looked like they could be used for Casterly Rock, the seat of House Lannister. And then, as I was working on this and going, maybe I should split this off into its own video to give it more focus, two other big pieces of related news came out that reinforced the need to split it off into its own standalone video. First, George R.R. Martin himself made a rare public interview talking about this a little, quickly with Entertainment Weekly on July 9th, talking about the Long Night prequel, in which he suspiciously started bringing up Casterly Rock and the Lannisters. And then we saw the first spy photo of Naomi Watts in costume, not in Northern Ireland, but her filming at the location in Italy, meaning she's part of that storyline, or at least maybe visits it. That might be up for debate, but this isn't just some side venture that, no, this all seems interrelated. A lot of people already speculated she might be part of the Lannister storyline or the Casterly storyline in some capacity. So all these three interrelated things of they're filming at this location in Italy that's got cliffs that look like Casterly Rock, Martin is bringing it up, and Naomi Watts is there, not just, oh, we'll send some side characters there. This seems fairly important. So, because of the spy photos from the sets, the filming locations in Italy, the reports from that, and Martin's comments, all combine into this, that it now seems all but confirmed that the founder of House Lannister, Lann the Clever, is in this prequel, along with Casterly Rock, which he famously swindled from its original owners, House Casterly, using only his wits. So I want to go through all of these points and briefly cover some of the most important things from the first video, just as a quick run-through if you missed that. Start with, we saw activity at Titanic Studios in Belfast, which is their base of operations, and where else are they filming in Northern Ireland? There's only 4 filming locations so far, apart from where they're filming in Italy. They've also got Belfast in the studio, and 2 location filmings in Northern Ireland. They've been filming a lot at the Marble Arch Caves complex, which is on the western side of Northern Ireland, and quite extensively. They were filming there for 2 weeks. Plus, there was some activity at Glenariff on the eastern coast, which is where they filmed Runestone in seasons 5 and 6, these lush mountain valleys, but that could be anything. It doesn't mean it is Runestone again. They might be reusing it for somewhere else. Plus, we're starting to see some activity at Magramorn Quarry again, but that could be anything. That's where they build large external sets. Everything from Castle Black to Winterfell, the Winterfell exteriors, to Hardhome. So who knows what they're constructing there, if it's necessarily Winterfell or something else. That's just one of their external studio, basically. But the spy photos at Belfast also seem to indicate that they're building an extensive cave set, cave interiors, to match what they're doing at the real-life Marble Arch system. Because, there's only so much a real cave can fit your filming needs versus something you build out of polyurethane or something. But all of this makes sense, that apparently there's going to be a lot of scenes set in caves. Makes sense because the children of the forest, well, they live often in caves. They're of the forest. Books say they had these hidden villages in the treetops and also extensively lived in caves and left behind cave drawings. But you saw that in the TV show, so we know they'll feature prominently in this. This is before their race started dying out, and they're very heavily tied to the White Walker storyline. So no huge revelation there, just, we assume we're going to be seeing a lot of caves in this. Then, we started to see these new orange filming posters, these filming signs when they on the road signs when they show "We're filming here, direct a truck here," or "Don't come in, we're filming for this." For the original show, they were pink and said GOT on them for Game of Thrones. For the prequel, they have these new road signs that they're orange, and they have this white picture of a mammoth on them. So we're hoping we'll see more mammoths like we used to, because they should be more prevalent this time period. It's before all the megafauna south of where the wall is got killed off by human encroachment gradually. But anyway, filming began, real filming, not just set construction, began around mid-June. And they were filming in the Marble Arch Park from around June 17th to June 26th. Then there was heavy filming in Belfast starting around June 24th. We don't have an exact timetable, but around when we were getting reports. This is my catch-up video. And we started getting a few shots of extras, but not even people in costume, just a few of their hairstyles, which I'll supplement the photos we have from Italy with those to show what they're doing. And there was rumor coming down the pipeline just from people on set saying they're calling it Blood Moon, that we started seeing photos of their letterhead and internal memos that do call it Blood Moon, which is weird because that is not a term which has ever come up in that form or anything about the moon like that in the current novels or backstory books about Westeros. So I talked about that in the first part about this isn't really a great name. Particularly, George R.R. Martin doesn't want to call it that. And in his new interview, he said, well, I wanted to call it something else. I'll get to that. So we also managed to get spy photos of someone posted a calendar of filming dates on a wall somewhere at the Belfast set. And it said the schedule is that they were filming in Northern Ireland from June 11th to July 10th. And then in Italy from July 15th to 18th or so. I'm surprised at how few we actually got out of this, that we didn't manage to discern something really huge from a spy photo. But whatever. So that's all the catch-up. Now, moving on to the new stuff, I was pleasantly surprised. They said, oh, it seems that they're filming in Italy. We're seeing trucks around that have their logo on it. Specifically, word started coming down around June 24th that they were setting up to film at the Grotta del Turco, which is this coastal cliff formation in Gaeta, Italy, which is in Latium. That it's south of Rome, but north of Naples on the west coast. I think it's pronounced Gaeta. I say Gaeta because I'm using the older pronunciation, but whatever. So they're filming in Gaeta at the Grotta del Turco. I'll say Grotta del Turco, that's easier to pronounce. And it involves coastal stuff. There's even a prop boat that they made, not a full-scale war galley, but this carved raft, this carved rowboat that they've been moving around. And we've seen quite a few cast members moving in and out of there. So just as we were starting to get word that they're gearing up to film at Gaeta in Italy, we got later spy photos after this. George R.R. Martin gave an interview with Entertainment Weekly on July 9th, like 6 days before the Italy filming was going to start, allegedly, filming with cast members, not just building sets, on July 15th. So Martin gave this interview, and it was specifically broken down into 5 points. Not all of them were huge revelations, so I'm going out of order leading up to the big one here. These are the 5 big points he made. First, because he's rarely talked about this prequel, if anything, he's tried to distance himself from it. He said, point 1, what can I say about this prequel era? And there's points where it's weird that, is he talking about the TV show or about the Long Night in general, passive-aggressively, like he's annoyed they're not doing something? Like if he said, well, House Martell in the books, it has a lot of female rulers, which they didn't really in the show. They cut them. They cut Arya and Martell. Like, is he passive-aggressively describing something he wishes they do, or is he just hinting at us this is something they will do? It's hard to say. But I don't get that feeling yet. I think everything he's saying here is either matter-of-fact or something they might do. But you be the judge. Point 1. He said the 7 kingdoms didn't exist yet, even as independent kingdoms. And we knew this already. He's just describing it for all the new people. He says, quote, we talk about the 7 kingdoms of Westeros, There were 7 kingdoms at the time of Aegon's conquest 300 years ago when the Iron Throne was forged. But if you go back further, generations before that, there's 9 kingdoms, then 12, then eventually you go back to where there are 100 kingdoms, petty kingdoms. And that's the era we're talking about here, the tiny petty kingdoms of the First Men. They talk about this a bit more in the World of Ice and Fire source book, where there weren't literally 100. There's a point where the author flat out says there weren't literally 100 kingdoms. But it's a poetic device to say it was all of these dozens of petty kingdoms everywhere. The real number was something between 50 and 100. It was closer to 50 than 100. Depends on the region. Like, the Reach was 4 different kingdoms. The North was like 12. The number shrank and expanded depending on conquest, so... But there's a couple of dozen smaller kingdoms, every one that you consider like a lord at the time of the War of the Five Kings was really a petty king. Like, the Umbers were petty kings of the area around Last Hearth. The Starks were kings of the region around Winterfell for many generations after the Long Night, but not of all of the North. They had to win it. The Boltons, big example, were the kings around the Dreadfort in the east. So it was this patchwork of petty kingdoms. I made a mock-up of it here in this map I made and all of Westeros was like this. But he's not saying any new information in this. He's just reiterating the 7 kingdoms as a regional term. It didn't exist yet. It's the 100 kingdoms, which is poetic device. And this was gradual, so when you see like the rise and coagulation of these kingdoms into the big 7 we see later. Point 2, and he's just describing the obvious. Point 2, and I like that he said this, I don't know how much it'll reflect anything. He said he doesn't like talking about Naomi Watts as, quote, the lead, because they're trying to be an ensemble show like Game of Thrones was, or how it was at first. I mean, compare seasons 1 and 2 with seasons 7 and 8 in terms of ensemble versus core cast. That it just turned into the Arya show because they're shilling Maisie Williams for Emmy Awards, versus all these other side characters like Stannis used to be his own subplot. And it just, obviously characters die off and they get more concentrated as you go, but even relative to season 1, there were just fewer speaking roles. But as Martin himself says, I'm putting my own view on this, he says, I hesitate to use the word lead. As you know, for Game of Thrones, we never even nominated anybody for lead actress or lead actor during award season until recently. That feels like throwing shade on them. It was always for supporting categories because the show is such an ensemble. I think that will be true for this show too. We don't have leads so much as a large ensemble cast, that when you see them now promoting, this was the idea that there was never, like for Lord of the Rings, let's put Elijah Wood up as best lead actor or Viggo Mortensen as best lead actor. They're all a supporting ensemble cast. When they won their SAG award, it was for ensemble cast. Yeah, they did have a supporting one for Ian McKellen once that they put him up for, but in contrast to this, where by the end it's turned into, let's push for Kit Harington to get lead actor, let's push for Emilia Clarke to get lead actress, when they're part of an ensemble, and you can't just keep treating it as celebrity culture like this. So, talk about this as you will in the comments of right during the middle of the nomination season. This is right before word of the nominations came out, but the submissions had gone out that they're shilling some of these people in major awards, that Martin said, this is ideally an ensemble show. That when he was writing his books, he was avoiding Hollywood tropes, among which is, no, you need to have a clearly defined one lead or a core cast, because this should be a TV show, that he intentionally wrote something that was true to life, that wasn't trying to fit within the confines of a TV screen, in which you can have hundreds and hundreds of characters, each of which are important. That was the point. That there's like 20 to 30 major characters, versus, Loras and Marjorie Tyrell aren't really that important. Let's marginalize them to make it more about showing off Tyrion or something. So, but this isn't new information. It just is this him throwing shade at that. HBO itself is promoting the hell out of, well, why should we like this new prequel? You haven't told us anything about it. Because it's the Naomi Watts prequel. That's their whole business model, is get A-list movie actors, and then people will watch your show, and there doesn't even need to be a story. It's the Naomi Watts show versus, no, tell us something about what the story is. I'm not just going to watch for the pull of Naomi Watts. And no blame to her. I don't know enough to hate on her for that. Obviously, this isn't her choice. That Martin is saying, no, it's an ensemble role. So that's what he hopes it to be. That comment's not so much about the prequel as about old wounds of how the original show turned out, but we shall see. So he's saying it should try to be an ensemble, and that reminding everyone it's the age of the 100 Kingdoms, of the first men. There aren't 7 kingdoms yet. There is no Iron Throne. Next point 3 is relevant to the current prequel, though, that he jokingly remarked on that there's been no official announcement about its name. This is like a week or two after major fan sites were leaking photos, not just rumors, oh, it's called Blood Moon, but spy photos of the name Blood Moon were coming out. So they do this a lot in Entertainment Weekly, where a leak will come out, and then they'll ask someone an oblique question about it in Entertainment Weekly, so they aren't confirming that the leak is true, but nonetheless addressing it. They've done this multiple times, and they always turned out to be real, but understandably, they don't want to go, oh, well, you got a spy photo, yes, it's called Blood Moon. Instead, they kind of indirectly asked Martin, hey, what do you think of the name? And without mentioning Blood Moon, he reiterated that, either of them mentioning Blood Moon, he reiterated that he wanted to call it The Long Night, which this is embarrassing that the guy who wrote this fictional universe, who is a living author, and they're calling the American Tolkien, is not writing this. He's repeatedly said, I've talked about this in other videos, it's not his story. Jane Goldman wrote everything. He didn't even give them an outline. At best, he was an advisor on it. When they'd come to him with questions that they didn't have to be beholden to what he told them, they could ignore what he told them. And they're not even calling it the name he wants to call it. It shows you how little control he has. So he reiterated in this interview, well, I wanted to call it The Long Night, though, quote, I heard a suggestion that it could be called The Longest Night, which is a variant I wouldn't mind. You know, that'd be pretty good. So I can see how, oh, well, if you really wouldn't title a whole series based on one episode from Season 8 that you also call The Long Night, or to confuse it with the event. It's about the Long Night, or Longest Night. Maybe it's not a specific enough title. I think you should put Game of Thrones in it so people know it's not like some nature documentary about owls or something at night, or the winter solstice. But he reiterated, I'd rather call it Long Night, even as we're getting confirmation of the code name. Maybe it's a code name, Blood Moon. We're not sure. I rant about this a lot more in the first video. So he reiterated his thoughts on the name. The last 2 of 5 points actually have somewhat new information in them. First, he confirmed the obvious. Yes, the Starks and White Walkers are in it. This isn't a revelation, and it's annoying when news sites, mainstream news sites, need to make a quota. So they go, Martin reveals that Starks are in this. It's in that short paragraph description that HBO put out last year. The only thing they've ever said about it, the only description we've had in 12 months, it said, quote, the Starks of legend and the White Walkers. So how is Martin going, yeah, the Starks and White Walkers are in it? That is not a revelation. You already said that in the 1 paragraph announcement you made about it. Arg. So well, this is what he exactly said, but it wasn't anything specific. The Starks will definitely be there. Obviously the White Walkers are here, or as they're called in my books, the Others, and that will be an aspect of it. Some people have speculated they'll call them the Others on this TV show prequel. I don't think they will. That's just Martin is often persnickety in his interviews going, you know, in the books they're called the Others. But I agree that when you hear it aloud, when you hear characters going, maybe the Others are here, that makes sense when it's capitalized in text, but in dialogue it's like, wait, the other horses, the other people? It's weird to hear that aloud, and I agreed with that White Walkers is a term they're called in the books, but less often, that it made more sense to give them a more distinct name in a verbal format. Now, I know it loses some of the poetry of it, it made sense for the TV convention, but that isn't anything new. What is new, on a tangent here, is we've been following the social media, the cast members. It seems someone really implied that Josh Whitehouse is playing a Stark, though I don't consider that big of a nomination. That on the Instagram of one of his friends who was filming with him, who was doing a photo shoot with him, they said, "Just did a photo shoot with Josh Whitehouse. It's so great to be working with a Stark," to that effect. And maybe they were making an assumption, but I'm pretty sure he's playing a Stark. Though that isn't really that big of a leak, and it's not a surprise. Consider, not as many people have heard of him as have heard of Naomi Watts. She was announced October 30th. Literally the next day, October 31st, they announced Josh Whitehouse is also cast in this. And then we didn't hear further casting news for many weeks. So if this is one of the two first people that you announced in this show, consider that, like, Peter Dinklage was the first person who was cast in Game of Thrones. Like, if Josh Whitehouse is, like, literally the second person you announced, I'm pretty sure he's a core character and very probably a Stark. Though there might be variation in that, for all we know, he's Lann the Clever. Just leaning towards, he increasingly seems to be a Stark, just based on his prominence. Maybe the person who made this Instagram post was assuming that. But people are jumping to the assumption that therefore he must be Bran the Builder. Well, if you were watching cold spy reports for season 1 or something of Game of Thrones with no knowledge of the storyline, that fake out that at first it's Robb Stark is the lead Stark character, but then his alleged bastard half-brother Jon Snow shifts into that role, or Bran Stark becomes the leader of House Stark by the end. So maybe Josh Whitehouse is a Stark, but maybe he's Bran the Builder's father in flashbacks, if there's extensive flashbacks, or maybe he's his older brother, or a cousin he's fighting with. We don't know if he's necessarily Bran the Builder or that's one of the other characters. There's more than one person with that general age, gender, and race. So, 30-ish white male. So we shall see. I think he's probably a Stark, though I wouldn't assume he's necessarily Bran the Builder. Could be, but depends how they play with that. But that isn't even confirmed news. I don't even consider that big of a revelation. To get back to what Martin was saying, the Starks are definitely there, as are the White Walkers. The next line, he said, also, there are things like direwolves and mammoths. Really? That's the first new thing. But the way he said it was very vague, so I'm urging caution on this, that there are things like direwolves and mammoths. Well, one of the big points about this as a prequel era in general principle on paper, I've talked about this if you haven't seen already, the playlist I have on my channel about, what would a Long Night prequel be like, is that one of the big points of it is that it's the dawn of prehistory when a lot more of those Ice Age megafauna were around. Like, direwolves are around in the present, but they're rare. I mean, they're even rarely seen by men of the Night's Watch. They go, we know they live north of the Wall, but they say right at the beginning they haven't lived south of the Wall in like 200 years. They have direwolves and mammoths, but I don't think living men have seen mammoths in a generation. They live in the very far north with the giants, so they're very rare. And, once or twice you'll hear of, the Targaryen queen came to Castle Black 200 years ago and they feasted her with mammoth meat, but like 200 years later, mammoths are very rare. This is the dawn of prehistory when there's all these critters all over the place. This is before their decline. So they're all in prevalent numbers. I don't know if direwolves would be prevalent in the north of the Neck, or if we could even see direwolves in large numbers in what are the Riverlands. I'm not sure. Would the mammoths be... What was their natural range before human encroachment drove them out? I'm not sure, but this reinforces that thing that they have those orange signs with mammoths on them. So, and in what capacity would we see a mammoth? Would it be like one big set piece, or are they a big part of the world there, like how Season 7 of Game of Thrones had them fighting a big snow bear. A snow bear is a bigger version of a polar bear. That doesn't mean it's part of their society or culture, just that they ran into one in the wilderness, which was dead, zombie. Versus, like, are we going to see them, like, using mammoths as transport or something, or riding them into battle? Who knows, in large numbers. Now, I'm actually reluctant about that, though, because the main TV show hated working with the actor wolves who had to play direwolves, to the point a lot of people suspect, they either rewrote them to get rid of them, or simply phased them out. Like, does Summer necessarily die in the books? Ghost, they didn't bother writing out, they just stopped putting him on screen, or thinking of reasons to say, why isn't he on screen? I don't know if Ghost's story changed significantly, but he barely appeared in the later TV seasons, except in a few establishing shots. And I understand it is hard to work with live animals. That they take a real actor wolf and use green screen to supersize it. It's just, dude, if they need to interact with cast members that much, just go for full CGI direwolves. If it's that hard. I mean, same if they had, like, a bear or something. Like, they had a real actor bear in Season 3, but if you need someone, like, riding a bear, like a warg who can ride a bear they're skin-changing into, magically, don't use an actor bear, don't leave the character out, use CGI. Like, I don't know, like, look at Harry Potter and Fantastic Beasts. Look at, like, the dragons from Season 2 of Game of Thrones, where you'd have to have them, like, perched on Daenerys' shoulder. You can't go, oh, well, if we got, like, a real condor doing that, it's hard to work with the live animal. Get a CGI dragon to be able to interact with it more, and then the only limitation is budget. I have other videos on this that help, like Miguel Sapochnik, big director for the past couple of seasons, has remarked it was easier to work with dragons than with the direwolves, because the dragon always does what you tell it, never gets sick, and can never get rained out. So they are more expensive, but the real problem with direwolves, filming the direwolves, was that it was incorporating a live wolf actor into the CGI. So while I hope they use direwolves again in large numbers in this, you need to use a full CGI animal if you need to use it that extensively. When they make the false choice of, well, I guess we shouldn't do it at all. We've been watching crappy CGI for years on other shows, like early Star Trek or Doctor Who or whatever, and we put up with it when there's a good story. It's called the willing suspension of disbelief. We'll watch, like, Cybermen and Daleks that are cardboard cutouts, as long as the story is worth it. So if they're so obsessed with, well, it either has to be a photorealistic direwolf or not at all, because the actor wolf was feeling moody that day, use the CGI animal if it's easier to control. But that's a whole debate. But then there's a question of how much would we see direwolves in this? I mean, would it be like a cameo? Would it be attacking someone once? Would they be about as prominent as, like, Grey Wind was in Season 2 when Robb confronts Jaime with it? Like bonded to a human master. Would there be mammoths with the direwolves, in the sense that we got one really big scene with a mammoth in Season 4, or are mammoths commonplace to the point that they're basically horses? Now, obviously not as prevalent as horses. I'm exaggerating for effect. It's just, would we be getting a giant riding a mammoth in every single episode? Or is that just a season finale thing? Or about as prevalent as the direwolves in Seasons 1 to 4 of Game of Thrones? I don't really know what they're shooting for. So his statement on it was vague. Just, there's things like direwolves and mammoths. That could mean a couple of things. There's this whole point in the books where Leaf, the head of the Children of the Forest, who's with Bran, it laments and explains that, all the megafauna are dying out from human encroachment, that, we're dying out from human encroachment too, that there used to be direwolves and mammoths all over the place. On top of that, she mentions there used to be cave lions, which I'm pretty sure means saber-toothed tigers. They went extinct. Even the regular lions are all but extinct in Westeros. You think the Lannister sigil is a lion. There are still a few groups of lions in the hills of the Westerlands, but people are surprised when they find them. They're all but died out. That Tywin's father was nearly killed by a lioness and was saved by Gregor Clegane's grandfather. That they were surprised that, wow, there's real lions around still. And they have some, like, in menageries, in private zoos that are captive, but wild lions are all but extinct. And I don't mean mountain lions, cougars. I mean, these are lions. So, if we're looking at, like, Casterly Rock and the Westerlands at the time of the Long Night, we would see, like, lion prides the way there used to be in ancient pre-Roman Europe, before the Romans, hunted them to extinction for the Colosseum. So, will we see more lions in this, too? I don't know. We might even see a saber-tooth. Which brings us to point 5. All of these first 4 points didn't really say anything. Even the fourth one, just, there's direwolves and mammoths. We assumed there would be. In what capacity, to what extent, we're not sure. The 5th point was where we seem to be able to glean something new from this. About Casterly Rock and the Lannisters, actually. 5th point. While not confirming or denying anything, he's speaking very precisely and vaguely and measuring his words. Martin heavily implied we will see Lann the Clever, Casterly Rock, and House Casterly in this prequel TV show. Simply by the fact that, he chose to talk about them. I mean, if he's in an interview and they go, hey, what's the Long Night like as a time period, and he started talking about the Dothraki unprompted in an interview, oh, yeah, well, during this time the Dothraki were in the Far East, and this is what they were up to. Not just to say they're not here, but going, this is what their culture was like. You're describing a story to us. Is this what we're going to see? To be clear, he didn't mention the Dothraki at all. I'm using that as an example. But when he actually did talk about it, he said, well, at this point in time, during the Long Night, Lann the Clever swindled Casterly Rock from House Casterly using only his wits. So, that implies we'll see that. For all the sticklers out there, his exact words were, so I don't mangle them, this is quoting the interview, there will not be any Lannisters, at least not at first, in terms of that name, because it's the story of their founding. But the prequel predates the rise of the Lannister family, Martin says. But there is another family currently residing in the future Lannister homestead. The Lannisters aren't there yet, but Casterly Rock is certainly there. It's like the Rock of Gibraltar. It's actually occupied by the Casterlys during this time period, for whom it's still named after in the time of Game of Thrones. So that's heavily implying we'll see the Casterlys and then Lann the Clever marrying into and swindling it out of them. Now, like I said, I kept saying I'm splitting this off from other videos. I split this off from my prior video on set reports. Originally, this was going to be the end, but it grew, because there were 2 other things that seemed to hint we were going to see the Lannisters or Casterly Rock even before this. First, and I have skipped over this before, there came this shot, not from Italy, but from Titanic Studios in Belfast, where someone said this looks like a huge carved lion's head. Now, the Lannisters aren't the only family to ever use a lion sigil. I mean, House Rain from the Reigns of Castamere had a lion sigil. They used a red lion, not a gold one. But you mention lions this prominently, you think Lannisters. This isn't just a random heraldry shield. I mean, look at this. This is a big and expensive lion's head statue. Time and effort went into this, so it seems important. Though the other question is, we don't know what the heraldry of House Casterly was. Maybe they were like a black lion or something. We're not really sure on the specifics of that. Maybe we'll be surprised that this is a Casterly thing. I'm not sure, but it seems to be like distorted through time. The artwork style is different across 8,000 years. It's not the exact same specific style, but it's still a lion. But we saw this lion statue on what would have been a castle interior set, most likely. Something at Titanic Studios could be anything. If you saw it at Titanic Studios in the main series, it could be anything from the inside of the Red Keep to the inside of Winterfell, so who knows what location it was supposed to be in that statue. But then we got the news that they're actually filming in Italy, at the Grotto del Turco in Latium. And that, again, that's the south. It's south of Rome, north of Naples. And I've been there a few times to visit, and the coastlines are filled with, you go on a ferry trip, they show you, like when I went to the Amalfi Coast, they are filled with these stunning coastal cliffs and rocky coves, a lot like how Casterly Rock is described in the books. And Casterly Rock even has its own tiny internal harbor in a coastal cave that they can seal off against external attack. And we only saw a little of Casterly Rock in the TV show, but enough to establish, this is kind of what it looks like. They did portray it like that, these sheer coastal cliffs like Gibraltar with some narrow inlets. So the coast of southern Italy has a lot of those. I've been to Italy twice, tangent here. First time I went to the south, land of my ancestors on my father's side. I got the blood of Rome in me. Second time I went to the north. We drove past Gaeta, I think, though, unfortunately, to get to Naples. We went straight to Naples, but I saw the Amalfi Coast. And if you ever go there, look at the stunning ancient Greek ruins at Paestum, which are nearby. These ancient Greek ruins that they have nearby there, these preserved temples. And you really get a sense, just traveling around there, of how layered Roman culture was. Bits of Latin tribes, bits of Etruscan, bits of Greek, moving around the Archaic period. So that was a little further south, but it's that same geography of these stunning coastal cliffs, going on a ferry boat and looking at them in the inlets from one town to the next. You're going on a boat looking at these coastal cliffs, and you just go, this is like the stuff I read about the Aeneid. When in the Aeneid, you're reading it in class, well, for my classics classes, and just, wow, there are coastal caves like this. This is so cool. It's like something out of a movie. I mean, you point a camera at it, you don't need special effects. A beautiful countryside in Italy. I can't say the same of Milan, though. There was a lot of urban sprawl when I went through Milan, and heavy traffic. There was a lot of pollution. I did not have a good time in Milan. Milan was not my favorite part of Italy. That's not to criticize all of the north, of course, for all of you in the north. I mean, Florence was an amazing part of life experience visiting Florence. Go there for all the stuff, medieval stuff. Assisi, I went to Assisi to see the site there. With the church and the chapel in the center of the order. Venice is for tourists, but damn it, it's a really fun tourist experience. The Cinque Terre in Liguria, all great. Just Milan, I didn't have fun in. But all that's great. I'm very happy they're finally filming in Italy now, because they always needed a Mediterranean location. And when they filmed in Malta, they needed the warm Mediterranean location. And when they filmed in Malta in season 1, they really, just from having people walking around, tore up their nature parks that they were filming in. And, Malta is pretty small. It's just some islands next to Sicily. So they didn't have much leeway there. With, when you destroyed one stretch of Earth, that's kind of our whole park here. So then they shifted to Croatia for their warm Mediterranean filming area by season 2. Then in season 5, they'd actually shifted to Spain, which is good. There's ruins there. There's a lot of different, diverse landscape there. For a lot of stuff from like Old Town to Dorne to Bravos, they filmed depending on where it is. But Italy, when you're going for just that archaic beauty of the landscape, that's what you're really going for. And I hope other prequels besides this get to film there. And just, why wouldn't you film in Italy? There's so much neat stuff there. I'm admittedly biased in this. Like, I know, like, on Westeros.org, Elio Garcia has mentioned that he's visited Spain so many times and has a wonderful experience there, that he's Cuban-American, so he's excited by, he's described as what the mother country is like, and his land of his ancestors. And, well, yeah, that's for him. For me, it's all about, I'm walking in the steps of the ancients in Italy, and fun time it was had. So, I've seen all the Italian Game of Thrones fan sites and channels are now having fun that, hooray, they're filming at our place now. This is so cool that they got to film here. And we get reports in the news in our original language. So they're having a good time with that. I'm happy it's their turn now to get a share in this. I'm going on a tangent here. I'm sorry. It's just, wow, I'm catching up on 2 months worth of news. I'm sorry this is rambling. Just, the Italy filming is really fun. I think it's going to be wrapping up by the time I'm posting this, for a 1-hour pilot. Maybe if this goes to series, they'll get more. I don't know. I hope they film other prequels there too. we shall see. But from all of these comments, from why would Martin be talking about Casterly Rock on July 9th, and then like 6 days later they're filming on these coastal cliffs in Italy that look like Casterly Rock, that we're pretty sure we're going to see Lann the Clever infiltrating Casterly Rock in this. And I think what he did was, well, that's the last section I want to get to here. I'm going to split off some of the other photo reports we got recently to a third video. Rest of this I want to talk about is, what are they doing specifically? And I don't like to speculate too much, because I always deride other channels and baselessly speculate on things, but within reason, what can we think they're doing? And the other problem is, you hope they're doing something rational when they're not. What if we were trying to predict in Season 4 what Season 5 Dorne will be like, based on their filming reports? And, well, rationally, this should be that thing from the book, when it turned out to be something entirely new that they really changed. So, what do I think they're specifically doing with all these elements floating around? Well, I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say what I suspect, in broad terms, might be happening, and don't hold me to this, is that Naomi Watts is playing a younger daughter of House Casterly, and John Sim is playing Lann the Clever, purely based on Sim's reputation for playing trickster types like the Master in Doctor Who. Now, there are variant stories about Lann the Clever, but the one I believe is the most pragmatic one, that he was just, not that he snuck in and killed people with magic, just that he was probably some hired sword for House Casterly, who ended up knocking up a younger daughter, so to spare her the shame, he ended up marrying the girl. And then through various court intrigues, he slowly eliminated everyone ahead of his children in the line of succession. Now, I really envision him as a Bronn-type character, Book Bronn. The TV show threw out his book storyline, which we were only starting to see a glimpse of in Season 5, where in the books, he in fact marries Lawless Stokeworth. He joins the minor nobility. So, Bronn's step-by-step rise in rank across the book series is fun. It's a joke that he's the one person who succeeds book to book. And it makes sense in the books because it's incremental. He goes from a sworn sword to Tyrion to a knight by book 2 for doing well. Then he's married to the youngest daughter of a vassal house by the end of book 3. Then he offs the older sister and her husband in a trial by combat. So now by the end of book 5, he's the acting lord of House Stokeworth with a couple of hundred swords at his command. And, the TV show doing the whole thing where they made him Master of Coin and Lord of Highgarden, that wasn't set up. It made no sense. No one just jumps to being that. Just, progressively over the course of a war where he's earning rewards through marriage, through legitimate means, he goes from being just this hired sword to the acting lord of House Stokeworth, which is not the equal of a House Lannister or Stark. It's just, they're like the size of the Mormonts or something. They're a major vassal house sworn directly to King's Landing. So who knows where he'll go from there, but he's been incrementally, sensically working his way up the ranks across a long book series in such a way that it makes sense. Now, I don't have a problem with the idea that Lady Casterly was in on it with Lann, that if they're trying to build up, but the Lady Casterly he knocked up was actually sort of the Harley Quinn to his Joker, the partner in crime. I often joke it would be fun if Lawless was kind of in on it with Bronn, of offing her older sister to take over. I worry they'll drastically change it to make Lann an idiot, and depower him to say, well, really, it was the Casterly daughter all along, and he was a mere figurehead for her. The legend is a lie, just to subvert expectations. That, there was a woman behind the man the whole time. I don't have a problem if she was in on it with him. She was his partner. That's fun. They could be a power couple like that. No problem if she's a co-conspirator. That even makes sense that she would be a co-conspirator. I think there's a difference between let's make Lady Casterly an active role too, and let's diminish Lann, as if it's a zero-sum game. That isn't feminism. I don't think they're going so far as to gender swap Lann the Clever so Naomi Watts can play the role. That doesn't make sense, but we've seen no evidence that they're doing that, so I won't accuse them of that with no evidence. I wouldn't put it past them to say that she's the woman behind the man and he was a figurehead, but we'll see. I don't think she's Lann himself, though. But on top of that, if you're talking about this in the comments, I anticipated this. A point against the idea that she plays either Lann the Clever or more probably Lann the Clever's Casterly wife, point against that is Naomi Watts is not a young woman. Lann has to produce a child with a Casterly daughter, and I think she's beyond childbearing age, so the one description of the character we got is she's a socialite hiding a dark secret. Maybe it's that Lann knocked her up years ago, and they are now positioning their teenaged child onto the throne of Casterly Rock. That is possible. That she's harboring a teenaged bastard child would be more interesting than an infant. More likely, just because of her age, I'm starting to think maybe she's playing the mother of House Casterly, and Lann knocks up her daughter, and that's the dark secret. I could be entirely wrong. Another thing, I just went, well, obviously, I hate it when people go, well, obviously. No, I don't know if Sim is playing Lann the Clever. Because then other people have been, on major fans, I've been saying, well, we kind of assumed Jamie Campbell Bower would be playing Lann the Clever based on his look, and he also has a reputation for playing these wry, cunning characters. So are they going to go with older, but A-list, Emmy, Oscar-level actors to anchor the story of Lann the Clever? Or are they, maybe she's playing the mother-in-law of Lann the Clever when he marries into House Casterly. There must have been a mother to a daughter somehow. That would make sense. We don't know how big of her role is. But I'm starting to think, other people thought, well, maybe she's part of this, she's a northerner and part of the storyline of Proto-Winterfell. Shows how little we really know. People going, maybe she's Bran the Builder, or just how much gender swapping do you think they're doing? But given that she's been in Italy at the filming locations in costume, I think she's playing a Casterly in some capacity, more probably the mother of Lann the Clever's wife, I think, but this is just the vaguest sense. You can see I'm tripping over myself, contradicting myself. I really don't know, but if you don't know the story of Lann the Clever already, they covered it pretty well in their animated featurettes, the histories and lore ones. Check out the one you can find on YouTube on Casterly Rock, narrated in character by Jaime Lannister, explaining the story of Lann the Clever, and how there's actually like a couple of variant versions about what he did, but the most pragmatic one is he was some hired sword, a guardsman who knocked up a younger daughter and eventually rose through the line of succession to put his children ahead of the other ones. Wild speculation. So much stuff is being invented for this TV show. That's why I don't think it's a good idea. It's not even like, well, look, there's a couple other things that Martin didn't write a prequel novella for, but he said, like, the Valyria thing, he gave them an outline, is what I was told, versus he never wanted this to be a prequel era, and there really shouldn't be characters here, but I'm rambling. What does seem confirmed after, this is the most speculation I'll ever get into at this point without more evidence, what does seem confirmed is that we'll see Lann the Clever and him swindling Casterly Rock from House Casterly. Exactly what role does Naomi Watts play in this storyline, I'm not sure, but she was around the set where they seem to be filming this in Italy. So again, I'm not in favor of this show. I'm reporting on the disaster, as it were, to criticize it. Do not get hyped about this. This is me reporting on the murder mystery, like people reporting on, if you really didn't like Last Jedi, for example, here's what they're doing on set now, to show you this is what they're doing. It's like a murder mystery to me of peeling out what are they doing. So I'm going to split this off here because this is me speculating on mammoths and the Casterlys and stuff. That's speculation. The next one will be shorter because it's just talking about new photos we got in the past week since I was recording this. We got photos of Naomi Watts in full costume in Gaeta, Italy. And I don't know what we can discern from one quick shot of her costume. It wasn't a very detailed one. Just, yes, she is filming there at what is apparently the Casterly Rock set. And we got these photos of a rowboat with Stark direwolves carved into it. Are they visiting Casterly Rock? And this mysterious new piece of heraldry where I'm pretty sure it's an archaic version of the Stark sigil, but maybe it's something else because the design is very different. plus some other stuff that the cast members have been posting on Instagram in the past week, and what we can try to discern from that, and a few new castings that we learned out from these Instagram posts, and of like people in actual costume, and like, wait a minute, this is what you think the Casterlys look like? I mean, it looks almost Grecian as opposed to Celtic, but maybe I'm looking at it wrong. So we only get bits and pieces to go on. So next one after this, please click to see the next one in sequence at the end of this linked, is going over the specific, we finally getting pictures of cast members in costume and that sigil. What can we parse out from this? Of what the heck are they doing?